Conference realignment is back in the news, and we're back on the Big Mountain, where we focus on the Big Ten and the Mountain West.
Hey, it's good to see you again. My name's JY. This is my good friend Steve, and we're bringing you another expansion episode, again, specifically looking at the Pac-12 and Oregon State and Washington State. We've had several episodes that we've had a great response to, a lot of good comments on the last one. And want to just do another update for you guys. There was a media call on Friday, September 21st. I was able to look over all of that, and as we have said before, we watched it so that you don't have to.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to run it down, give you some of the highlights. I wouldn't say there was anything earth-shattering here whatsoever, but I will say some of the tone that was given to some of these topics I found to be somewhat interesting. I don't know if that was done intentionally or not. But anywho, let's go down through this. It just started out, and I'm going to mix and match this a little bit to try to keep us together. It was mainly they started out with some introductions and opening statements. Then they just got into a Q&A from various different reporters and whatnot, and the questions were kind of all over the place, quite frankly. It wasn't specific to expansion. But I want to go over some of this. So Schultz started, who's the president of Washington State University. He just mentioned that the situation is exceedingly complex. He talked about the fiscal situation of the Pac-12 and that it's far from clear. We've talked about that before. I know specifically Steve has been bringing up the whole debt issue. And again, specific to the Comcast debt, but there's other debts, and Schultz alluded to that. He didn't get into specifics, but he talked about these liabilities several times, and I really got the feeling he's pretty concerned about
Absolutely.
what those liabilities are, not just the Comcast debt.
And it's good to point out he's not only the president of Washington State University, he is president of the Pac-12 Board of Trustees.
Correct. He's the president of the board.
Yeah.
And he stated, while they certainly possess some valuable assets, it's also burdened by some significant liabilities. They did bring up, again, the Comcast specifically, but he talked about, in generality, some other legal issues that they're having. And, for them, getting a further financial picture has been much more difficult than they expected, which I still struggle to understand. We've had that conversation. Certainly, there's got to be financial statements here, and I don't know if they necessarily mean the financials. I think they're probably more alluding to the risk of what could happen in the future, especially if he's talking about. I don't think he's talking about liabilities necessarily from an accounting standpoint. I think he's talking more about liabilities from a risk standpoint, a legality standpoint. Again, not about the Pac-12 and these 10 schools leaving, just about current ongoings of the Pac-12.
Yes.
There's some issues there within the Pac-12. Later on, there was a question that kind of pressed them a little bit more on, what do you mean by you want more information on assets and liabilities? Again, they weren't uber specific about that, but he did get into, again, they have to better understand what the net assets are. They need clarity on all of this. And again, he stated, there is thought to be, and these are kind of in his, I'm paraphrasing, but there's thought to be a lot of assets and money with the Pac-12. But again, there are significant liabilities that they're concerned about. And he stated as well, the Mountain West. And this is probably the part that was most telling to me.
They're concerned.
The Mountain West wants to know what those liabilities are. Again, if we're looking at a merger here and the Mountain West is somehow going to be financially responsible in any way to any of these Pac-12 liabilities, they need to know that. So a lot of this conversation really kind of fit the mold of, we need to know this so we know what we can do with the Mountain West. He didn't say it that specifically, but that's really kind of the flavor I got of a lot of this.
Which is interesting because we've been talking about these liabilities since our very first expansion episode. There were definitely some comments that took issue on that. Oh, that's not a big deal, whatever. They can make it work, yada, yada. But, it's obviously on the mind of the Pac-12, the president of the board, Washington State president, the Mountain West, and if they are, it's kind of like in real life when you merge two households together, you want to know what's the debt, what's the income, you want to know what's coming. So it makes perfect sense.
Yes, he did say, that we need to have patience with some of this, and he did say that he expects to have a lot of these answers known in the next 30 days. So maybe by the end of October, a lot of these fiscal questions, I don't know if they'll be publicly answered, but certainly answered enough that they can have more discussions with the Mountain West or whomever that they're having discussions with. Yeah. They mentioned that OSU and WSU are meeting daily to explore their path forward. Very much a team effort here. This meeting was on Friday, a day before they were going out to play football. There was some talk about that. They played each other on Saturday. But you could tell they definitely are in this together. They definitely want to do what's right for these two schools and their communities and their student athletes and whatnot. And it was good to listen to that they're 100% in this together and trying to forge a way forward. They did obviously ask about the legal proceedings. We did a video on a pretty deep dive into the last legal proceedings when they got the temporary restraining order. If you didn't see that, check out our channel. We again deep dive into that and what was presented. Some very interesting things there in that hearing. But of course, and I said in the last episode, courts move slowly. Even though the judge stated, I think you want to get this done quickly. Mm-hmm. Quickly in his mind is not a week or two. Courts are slow. Yep. So here we sit, the end of September. There's been no progress on this whatsoever. Specifically, they said they're waiting on scheduling a preliminary injunction.
So no new court dates have even been scheduled at this point.
There's been nothing since then. Again, not a surprise to me. Lord knows when it'll happen. I'm not going to make a guess on it, but it's not going to be fast. I mean, fast in the judge's mind is different than fast in all of our minds, quite frankly. They then got into next season's schedule. There were some questions about, what are you doing for next season? Obviously, they're running all kinds of different scenarios. They're looking at all kinds of different things for 24-25. They did mention regionality is important to them, which again, I tie that to, the Mountain West makes, if regionality is important, I can't remember which president or AD spoke, and I should have mentioned this, it was the two presidents and the two ADs were on this call. They were very clear that regionality is important to them. And then also they stated that an absolute deadline for scheduling 24 would be late fall of 23. So I'm guessing 30 to maybe 60 days max. I mean, I would think by Thanksgiving here, they're going to need to know what they're doing for next year. So again, we're going to keep doing these episodes. We're still going to keep you guys up to date. I think there's going to be a lot happening, even if it's not the legal proceedings. Certainly them moving forward, trying to figure out what they're doing for next year is going to keep evolving here pretty quickly. They talked about media partnership, which is huge. That's a huge revenue generator. They said they do have a media consultant right now. They're creating plans for next steps. Again, kind of tying that to the scheduling piece. And they stated, I think it was Schultz that stated, this is the worst media environment in 30 years. So really bad time to trying to be going it alone, if you will.
Right. And the thing is all of these other conferences have already locked up.
Right.
And all the media partners, all the traditional media partners are locked up. They all have these long-term deals locked in stone. So for them and that's really what hurt the Pac-12 was being the last kind of, the caboose of that train.
Right. Last man standing and everybody else is already locked in. Yeah. They got briefly into recruiting, and of course, how is this going to affect recruiting? Which I don't think at this point nobody really knows the answer to that. They just stated basically that it's already a challenging environment with the NIL, with the portal. This is just another challenge that they'll have to face. So they kind of brushed over that a little bit because again, I don't think there's a definitive answer on that. They touted their schools and why the student athletes come there. It's not just because they're in a Pac-12. It's because of what the university is. Another thing they talked about, and we touched about this, was specifically a merger with the Mountain West. And as I said, there was flavors of that throughout. Yeah. But there was a specific question about that. They said they've had very constructive conversations, specifically with the commissioner of the Mountain West. We reported last time that Washington State has an advisory committee that has met with the Mountain West to see what they have to say. There's mutual interest on both sides that they stated. Again, I don't know if that's surprising, but it's good to hear them say that. Yeah. I think so far it's been a kind of like, oh yeah, we know it's happening. Yeah. But to me, it was a little bit more than like, yeah, it's happening. It was like, yeah, we're mutually trying to figure this out. And it gets back to my original statement about the financials. I think the financial question's more for the Mountain West than it is for I mean, they need to know what's going on,
Yes.
obviously. But if the Mountain West is going to take this on, or even have a reverse merger, those schools want to know what they're taking, or what are they getting into.
And it makes complete sense that both sides, they want to have a real and accurate picture of what the financials look like before they combine.
Yes. So they say they have looked at plans and have made real progress, according to them. So I think that's great to hear. Last couple things that they mentioned, they talked about this relegation and promotion item that came out. We hit on that this last topic. I think that's a little bit pie in the sky. OSU started off saying they think that it's coming. Some sort of a hybrid model like this is likely going to be coming. Schultz kind of brought it back to earth a little bit, and his comments basically were he doesn't think you're going to see any movement in this type of scenario for at least 4 to 5 years. And his last statement, which I think was spot on, was it's going to need to come from the larger schools, meaning if this is going to work, and I think the Boise State not recommendation, but what was proposed and what was kind of put out there, it wasn't about the Mountain West and these two PAC-12 schools. Mm-hmm. It was more an overall relegation and promotion environment football, with multiple large conferences, whether it's the SEC, the Big Ten, whoever it is, but it's way bigger than just 14 schools.
Right.
Or you add a couple and it's 18 schools or whatever it is, 16 schools. It's way bigger than this. So it's interesting. We'll probably keep talking about it. I think specific to this scenario, very, very unlikely that there's going to be some sort of a relegation promotion environment with a PAC West, as we've been calling it. The only other thing I need to say, and I have to say this, I found it really interesting. A question came up about the Pac-12 commissioner, Klyakov. I can't say it. Klavikov, yep. I think is his name. And it was kind of funny because at first the OSU president, she said what you would expect a president to say. He's in a very difficult situation. He's in between board members. Some of the things that we've hit on before. This Schultz said absolutely nothing. The only one that spoke to that question was the Oregon State president. And Schultz didn't have like a grimace or anything, but he did not say anything about it. Clearly, I think there's definitely some conflicts between him and the Pac-12
Better to say nothing at all.
Exactly. He stayed far away from that question. She took it. She almost like jumped on it. Yeah. Almost like they were prepared. She took it. She said her answer was great. Schultz left it alone. Yeah. So anyway, that was the summary of that. Again, nothing like earth-shattering, but I think the flavor of how things were said, the direction of some of the answers to the questions, to me was somewhat telling. At this point, again, questions need answered before they can move on, but it was interesting for an hour and 15 minutes or whatever it took to watch it. So what do you got, Steve? I think you have a couple things to add.
I do. So first of all, I want to address some of the points that you made.
Okay.
Again, I think all that makes sense. I've continued to be impressed with Schultz. He's not an emotional person. He's looking at this. He has a certain path to take, and he's going to follow that path. He's going to follow whatever legal measures that is the best for his school and the two of them together.
Yes.
I think he's got his head on his shoulders, and I'm glad to see him there advocating for those two schools, their student athletes, and all the people involved in those programs.
Agreed.
Now, what I want to say about the commissioner there, I'll just call him Commissioner K.
Okay.
The Pac-12 had its problems for a while, and they actually had another commissioner before him that has many, many detractors. But I will say he owns a big piece of this, and so right now we're focused on what does Oregon State and Washington State think of him, and how are they interacting him with this situation?
Sure.
But if you take a few steps back, the other schools, USC and UCLA, there were rumblings, there were rumors of they were not happy with his management of this process, of the conference, how he managed the media deals. There were two conferences, the Pac-12 and the Big 12. They kind of took divergent paths.
Yeah.
And the Big 12 has come out of this looking fantastic. They got a media deal. They've added teams. They're looking good. They're looking stable. And the Pac-12 completely collapsed. And so you could make that argument that he basically every single move he made was the wrong move. I mean, there's definitely an argument for that.
I can tell you, there's a lot of hate. Amongst I think all Pac-12, but especially the Coug and the BF fans. towards Commissioner K.
Absolutely. And those other teams, they don't care anymore because they're out. They got out. They go into greener pastures. They're like, whatever that got, But these two are stuck with them.
Right.
They're in the middle of a messy divorce.
Correct.
And this is like their stepdad that they hate, and they're stuck with them. So, anyways, so that was one thing. Also, another thing to point out, we've been talking about those liabilities, the Comcast debt, and all that. Mm-hmm. Another really interesting part is the Pac-12 is the only conference that owned their TV network.
Yes, themselves. Right. You mentioned that before as well.
And they, at the time, it was sold as, this is a great thing, okay? We own our own network, we get all the money from it, whatever. Whereas the other schools, they partnered with Fox or with ESPN, the other conferences, and they're sharing the profits, but they're also sharing that liability, the cost for creating it, the liabilities that come with those. So they reduce their risk.
Yes.
Whereas the Pac-12, the two schools that are left, they're left holding the bag of this huge, monstrous TV network that was created that employs a bunch of people. There's costs, there's liabilities involved in that. What are they going to do with that? That's a big albatross, I think. So I'm really wondering how that plays into those liabilities that.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. We've had a ton of comments, especially on our last episode, and I'd love to get to at least some of them. We're not going to be able to do it in this episode, but a couple of times it's been brought up about the Pac-12 network. They actually just moved to a new offices or a new building, and I don't know enough. We've talked about trying to get into the weeds of. The assets and the liabilities, the revenues and whatnot. I'm not sure how we're going to do it if clearly Oregon State and Washington State doesn't know the answers to that. So I'm going to be following that very closely because I do want to know. I think it's a huge question.
It is,
and I don't know if a viewer knows. Please let me know. Okay, so they have a new building. Everybody's touting this new building, and there's a huge asset there.
Right.
Well, there could be a huge debt with that. I don't know. I don't know if the schools. If they had cash and paid for it, or if there's debt, I would assume that there's debt associated with that. So there's a huge asset, but there's a huge liability associated with that.
Great
building. I'm assuming. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yep.
So everybody wants to focus on the assets. That's the easy thing to think about. Yep. But I guarantee you, and again, it gets back to what Schultz said. He was he wasn't focused on the assets. He was focused on the concern of the liabilities.
Right. That's a smart thing to do when you're looking at a merger. I mean, really, they're looking at a possible corporate merger, and that's what you want to be looking at. So makes a lot of sense. It's not as fun and exciting as talking about relegation and stuff, but that's the real world. That's the issues that are going to be played out between the schools, between the conference, in the courtroom, between accountants and lawyers, and
absolutely.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is. I've done some research. There's some articles that came out that I read. I've done some other research on how this potential Pac-12 realignment, possible merger with the Mountain West, or what they're going to do going forward, how that affects the college football playoff.
Yes.
Which is a huge entity, tons of revenue.
Yes. And it's been a huge question thus far.
Yes.
Nobody really knows what that means, as a Power 5 school or a Power 5 conference and whatnot. So.
Yes. So here's the thing.
I might be really anxious to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think you're going to find some of this interesting. Okay. So first of all, let's take a step back. What is the college football playoff as an entity? Mm-hmm. So basically, we talk about Power 5 and Group of 5, but really there's no designation within the entity of it's all the conference commissioners, plus the athletic director of Notre Dame. Okay. So
aren't they special?
Yes, exactly. Notre Dame special. That's a different topic for another episode.
I had to throw that in there.
Yeah. So they all get a vote. And any decision they make has to be unanimous. Mm-hmm. Can't be 11-1, 10-1, whatever.
Okay.
It's got to be unanimous. So right now there's a deal. The current deal is through the 2024 season. Let me see here. Let me just check my notes. Through the 2025 season. So after this year, the current college football playoff deal goes through the 24 and then the 25 season. So there's 2 more seasons after this.
Okay.
And right now, the current structure is the top 6 conference champions. So you notice I didn't say the Power 5 conference champions or whatever.
Yes.
The top 6 ranked conference champions get an automatic berth.
Okay.
For next year. This is what I'm talking about for next year.
Right.
And this is the format they're going to use for 24 and 25. So top 6 conference champs get a berth, and then the next 6 ranked teams. So the assumption has always been, and sometimes the way it's reported is, okay, the Power 5 champions all get an automatic berth, and then there'll be one group of 5.
Right.
But really, that's not how it's written. That's not how the agreement is.
Okay.
It's just the top 6 conference champs.
Okay.
So that leads into my next point.
Okay.
So there's been reporting on this. I've read some of the reporting, and I actually went to the NCAA website and looked at their bylaws based on some of the reporting I saw. And so according to NCAA bylaws, you can operate as a conference. So you have to have 8 teams. Minimum is 8 teams.
Yes,
okay?
right. Yep.
We've established that before. Yep. However, if you don't have 8 teams, you can still operate for 2 years.
Right.
There's no limits. There's no minimum.
2 teams.
2 teams.
Maybe 1 team, I guess.
Exactly.
Somehow.
So you get a 2-year grace period to kind of fix yourself, okay? So this year, the 23 season,
Right.
Pac-12 still intact.
Right.
The next 2 years, as it looks right now, they'll have 2 members.
Right.
So a big part of why I think Washington State and Oregon State are trying to keep, there's a long-term and a short-term.
Yes, right.
So they have all kinds of long-term considerations. We've talked about that, the brand and all that.
Yeah.
But in the short term, if they can keep intact as a conference, even with only 2 members these next 2 years, they have a good chance of still getting an automatic berth.
Right.
If one of those 2 is ranked in the top 25,
right,
which the way Oregon State and Washington State is playing right now,
fantastic.
It's going to be fantastic for them. They have a good chance of getting an automatic berth.
Right.
And
that's a 50% chance.
Yeah, exactly. And they have, so that means they are going to be a guaranteed stakeholder. They're going to get a large guaranteed share of that revenue.
Okay.
And so I've seen with them expanding to 12 teams and the increase in revenue over the next 2 years,
right,
I've seen that could be as much as, if you have a team that makes it into the playoff, could be as much as $300 million of revenue, of additional revenue.
Wow.
Just for the playoff, on top of what they're already getting. Their normal revenue. So that's, to me, that's a huge financial incentive. I think both you and I look at things the same way. Money makes the world go round.
Yeah.
Money is the number one driver and incentive for all of this. You know, we can talk about all the other things, but generally money is the driver.
Right.
That is huge financial incentive for them to, at least for just these next 2 years, stay together, keep that conference together, because they can potentially get a massive boost, a massive financial windfall from that.
Right.
Now, there has been talk of moving to a 5-7 formula. However, the AAC commissioner has blocked that. Mike Oresco, he basically, whether he voted against it or indicated he would vote against it, he's saying, no, we want to keep it 6-6 for the next 2 years. This is what we agreed upon.
Right.
Once we get past those 2 years, we can look at changing the formula, but we're not going to just change the formula because with all this going on, one conference is poaching from another.
Right.
We're not going to just change the formula of what we were expecting the next 2 years just because these other conferences want to, poach people and move and whatever. So it looks like, based on, because it only takes one person to veto it, it looks like they're going to keep that model of the 6+6 for 24 and 25 seasons.
Okay.
So to me, that's a huge deal. It's a massive incentive for them, at least for these next 2 seasons, to keep the Pac-12 intact. I thought that was really interesting. And for me, I really think, we focused on what's going on with the Pac-12 because how it affects the Mountain West.
Right.
And even bigger than that, all of that ties into the college football playoff. And so I wanted to bring that info to our viewers, talk about that. Do you have any feedback?
Well, I was just going to say, don't you think, to get back to your the money making the playoffs, let's just assume, I'm going to do a hypothetical, that they either merge with or reverse merge, whatever.
Yeah, they merge with the Mountain West.
They're part with the Mountain West now. Right. Whatever. 14 teams. They're still highly likely to be a 50-50 shot at winning the championship, whether it's in a Pac-12 or Pac-2 or in a Pac-West. I would guesstimate that the Beavs and the Cougs are going to win that conference in the next 2 years. I would assume so.
Yes.
So I'm not sure.
So,
I mean, I get it. It's guaranteed if you stay a Pac-2, but I would almost say it's almost guaranteed if you join the Mountain West.
But but here's the thing: is if they're only the two teams and they get that $300 million between two
split
teams,
it between them.
Instead of splitting it between 12, 14 teams, right. And also over the next 2 years, I think there's still a good chance you could see where Oregon State or Washington State gets that berth, and you might also get an additional Mountain West team. A Fresno,
true, right?
In a 12-team scenario,
right?
Boise,
yes, right.
So, for these next 2 years, while it's the 6 and 6, I think there's a lot of financial incentive, and honestly, that gives you kind of a cushion to figure out all of this. And they could do something. They could do a scheduling agreement where those two teams are playing Mountain West teams.
Right.
So I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I just thought this was a really interesting part.
That is interesting.
How does the college football playoff revenue over these next 2 years factor into their decision making?
Well, and we've talked about a Pac-2 for the next 2 years.
Yes.
I mean, that's nothing new to our conversations, and I've seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
I think this puts a very significant financial reason why it could be a Pac-2 versus merging immediately. And again, you get back to that short-term, long-term type of thing, and how do they work that out? But yeah, that's some good information there, Steve. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, hey, I want to get to, lastly, we did a poll on our last episode. Yep. We heard back from some of our viewers. So if you haven't seen the poll, we did a poll that was asking our viewers, where do we see the Cougs and the Beavs in 2025? So 2 years from now, 2 seasons from now, where are they going to be at? Again, we talk football here, so football season 25. Option 1 was still in a PAC. Mm-hmm. PAC-X, whatever that is. Yep. Option 2 was just in the Mountain West. The PAC dissolves. They move to the Mountain West. They're in the Mountain West Conference. Option number 3 was a merger with the Mountain West. One way or the other. I'm not going to get into the details. Just somehow they merged together.
Yep.
And item number 4 was they're an independent or some other conference, Big 12. I've seen Big 12 thrown around. I think you and I both agree that ship is likely sailed. I think all ships at this point have sailed, at least for now. So our poll results, we actually had a tie. It's like kissing a sister.
I loved seeing all the comments come in.
I agree.
It was great.
Even for those that didn't vote in the poll, a lot of great comments, a lot of just different thoughts on this and whatnot. But our tie was between 1 and 3, so either still in a PAC or in the PAC something, PAC-X, or merge with the Mountain West. They got the same amount of votes. We didn't have any votes for in the Mountain West.
All right.
So nobody thinks that they're just going to dissolve the Pac-12 and join the Mountain West. They think they will be some sort of a merger. And I think as we sit right now, whether it's in the short term or the long term, I think that makes the most sense. I think hearing the media call, I think everything that we have been reporting on and everything that we've done over the past month or so leads me to believe some sort of merger with the Mountain West is the most likely scenario. But still a lot of time, a lot that needs to be figured out. This legal case is at the forefront of it. Obviously, the fiscal piece is probably the second piece, but the legal piece in terms of membership is by far the most important issue right now. Hopefully we get some movement on that here in the next month, but I'm not holding my breath. As I said, the courts are slow. So anyway, I think that does it for this episode. Yeah. We thank you for sticking with us. Hey, drop us some more comments. We love to hear from you. The last episode, we got a ton of great comments. Probably do another poll in the future at some point. You have something else?
I was going to say, for our viewers who are interested in conference realignment, we're going to do another video getting an update on the ACC, some things and how that affects the Big Ten. So there's been some new developments with the ACC. I've been teasing for a little while that I did get some information a few weeks ago from my contacts at Penn State and in the Big Ten. So we are going to do another video focusing on the ACC and the Big Ten. If you're interested in it, make sure you check that out.
I'm looking forward to that one here. We'll get that one out here soon as well. So, hey, we thank you for tuning in. We're going to keep up the speed on this. Anytime some news drops, we want to get it to you guys, give you our opinions on where we're at, and keep giving us likes, keep giving us comments. Love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.